Hi, welcome back to Selling the Ages. My name is Weston, and I'm super excited today to be talking about the Industrial Revolution. I think this is a really interesting topic on how we currently see the impact of psychology on the different advertising and brand building that occurred in the Industrial Revolution. We also talk about consumerism and convenience culture and what the impact is today. So I'm super excited to have you here, and let's just get into it. Today we're talking about the Industrial Revolution and its impact on the use of psychology in advertising and marketing. And it is massive. Big change. The Industrial Revolution was something that truly changed the course of history. And I think that when we're involving how psychology was utilized in such an important fashion in that era, and then on top of that, how it kind of created modern day consumerism and the impact of mass production and also just the convenience culture. Those are all kind of like the trickle-down effects from that era. So I'm super excited to be talking about this today. I think as we like to start out, I'd love to kind of give me, from your perspective, what is the Industrial Revolution? Give us the impact, give us the context.
Okay, so the context is, and it's before people think it is. If you think back to the invention of the printing press, for example, that's industrial. You suddenly could print multiple copies of something quickly. That was not available before that. So the idea of an industrial revolution begins with the ability to mass produce anything. It wasn't that it was invented in the 19th century, but a lot of what enabled it became available in the 19th century because of the technology that became available. There was mass-produced Greek pottery and Roman lamps, those little lamps that you see in museums.
Beer in Egypt.
Mass production was a way to quickly make a lot of money. So it is a very useful technology. But what enabled what most people consider the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century had to do with our ability to create certain things like quickly processed steel. But it didn't just occur in a vacuum of technology. In other words, it didn't just pop up because we had the technology. It continued because it began a cycle of consumerism. And this is an interesting area of study for historians, and it changed quite a bit because in the beginning, when they began studying the Industrial Revolution, they began to study it from a supplier point of view. In other words, the captains of industry were producing these things, and that was most important to the study of what made it successful. But that's not really what made it successful. And in the 60s and 70s, when we started studying social history, a lot of people will call it bottom-up history, but that term has kind of died away. It is more aligned with studying who was buying the stuff and how that drove market forces. Because you can produce, and we have proven this, all kinds of things that we think are going to be hugely popular, and they turn out to be a complete flop. Mm-hmm. So what was amazing about the Industrial Revolution was not just that we had a faster means of production. We had, as you said before, the understanding of the psychology of what made people buy those things. Mm-hmm. So there are certain historians that will argue that the Industrial Revolution is also the invention of consumerism. I'm not going to touch that because I'm not an expert in that area, but you can't argue that the history of industrial production requires that you look at what influence made people go out and buy these mass-produced products.
What is the insane demand? Where does it come from?
What created the insane demand? And some of the demand, looking back on it, like snake oil salesmen, for example, was truly insane. Why did something become a fad all of a sudden? And again, fad is not new. They had fad in the Egyptian period and the Roman period. They were selling cosmetics to Romans and Greeks too. But the Industrial Revolution created global demand. Suddenly you were able to create products on a scale that could be shipped to the entire world. So it isn't just one thing that created the mass sales capacity of the Industrial Revolution. It is a few things. First of all, it was the ability to produce in mass, not necessarily safely, by the way, which required cheap labor and readily available materials from everywhere. So you had to be able to ship in materials that you didn't necessarily have for yourself. And you had to do that quickly. Again, they've been able to ship materials all over the globe since the invention of shipping. But it is the scale at which we could do it for the Industrial Revolution. But then also to produce things like labels that had, think of the cigar industry for a minute. The beauty of those labels was, they are art forms. We have some in the archives at USF that have been collected for a long, long time that have the 4-color print books that went into making those labels. All of that was influence. So what is it about the ability to create products quickly, get them to market quickly, and really make people believe, this is the key thing, that that cold cream is going to make you much more beautiful, that you are going to be the perfectly coiffed wife at the end of the day with a brand new refrigerator
Perfect
and a
housewife.
brand new stove and this newfangled blender thing, but you are going to look amazingly perfect while doing it because of all these new products that have been mass produced. So for me, it is the most interesting period for what your topic is, your expertise is. How did this happen so quickly?
Absolutely. It's such, they complement each other so well, because without demand, there is no supply. What created the demand that made the Industrial Revolution so necessary? And I think that there were a couple different things which we've talked about. There's a little bit of that fear factor. This is in between different, world wars. This is in terms of pandemics. There's things that happen that there's outside factors that cannot be controlled. But it's the way that businesses kind of used that, which still happens today in every capacity, which we're just coming out of COVID. We understand what that looks like. And the emergence of the brands that stand the test of time because they are able to capture that supply, that demand. And I think that that's so interesting. And so when I focus on the psychology of advertising, the psychology of marketing, I go back into the very neurological responses that we have. It becomes the emotional responses that we as individuals and as consumers need when we're either buying something, which is when you're receiving that kind of that dopamine hit, when you're able to actually purchase something at your fingertips or when you're inside of a store, or the dopamine effect of just liking a picture online. And maybe that relates to a brand or the bigger picture of a brand's narrative. So the psychology behind the advertising is the essential piece to understanding why mass production during this time was necessary. It's so interesting. I mean, just some of the examples that we had talked about before too is convincing people that buying bread is better than making it from your home.
All kinds of products.
All kinds of products.
That advertisers were able to make us believe were better than homemade.
Yeah.
And that, I know we've talked about this extensively, that convenience culture now is never going to go away. That horse is out of the barn. So how do we do that responsibly now has become part of the influencer culture. Yeah,
Absolutely.
we want paper plates, but we also want them to biodegrade. And I think that has been shifting, influencing too. I've been watching that recently.
Absolutely. And I think that it's so interesting where we take those concepts and we understand that you're looking like an Amazon. There's no chance that we're never going to revert back to a time before Amazon. And that is the epitome of convenience culture. It is, I want something within 24 hours. And if I do not have that within 24 hours, I'm going to be upset that my Prime didn't allow that to happen. And
it's also removed planning.
Yeah.
So party planning, which we happen to do frequently, you don't have to think about it months in advance now.
Right.
You can think about something the day before and have it for whatever it is that you're planning.
100%. And there's also so many negative impacts that come out of this. And, I think that we can be honest and transparent about what that negative impact is. Not only on, if we're going to go back to the exploitation of people at that time, which is a huge, huge topic.
Major problem
of people who didn't know better. It's the emergence of urbanization. People came from rural areas to join these factories who are paying, consistent wages, and people felt like this is where I need to be to make a living. And then unfortunately, they may be working with, deadly products and they would have no idea.
The match girls, great example of that.
Yeah, maybe
women were dying quite literally for making the convenience of matches, wooden matches. There were, and this is true of anything else that becomes rapidly popular. You don't see the consequences necessarily right away. So in order to understand both positive and negative influence, you have to look at mass production, but then what's the fallout of mass production as well? And that's with ideas too. It's not just products, because now influence has the chance to perpetuate ideas much faster than it did when advertising was a much slower process.
I think back to, a conversation that I had with my dad about his parents. My grandmother, his mother, was a very successful businesswoman in an era where many women were not going out on their own and creating businesses for themselves. She was one of the first really successful florists that was in Tampa. She was approached by Disney. She was very successful. And as a working woman in that era, in the same era that you have the Avion books or, the selling of like the perfect housewife, she didn't fit that mold. And it's really, really interesting when my father and his brothers grew up on TV dinners. So going back to that convenience culture where they also didn't know any better. They were marketed and they were sold that this is going to be great for you. You won't have to waste time cooking. It's super healthy. It's going to be great.
This is before the microwave too.
Yes, this is before the microwave and even the emergence of it, when that's what they were using. They just popped it in, or they popped it into the oven and it was the tin foil. Like, we had no long-term understanding of what those effects were going to be like. And unfortunately, the reality is that they were not good for us. And I think that
very true.
They weren't. And I think, it's not their fault because you don't know what you don't know. And she was a hardworking woman who just wanted to be able to provide for her family in both ways.
It was freedom, basically. It was freedom of spending an entire day cooking a meal, and there's nothing negative about that, especially if you love to cook, as I do. I don't mind spending hours cooking a meal, but there are some days when I cannot do that for whatever reasons. And the fact that industry was able to free people from the constraints was a positive thing, but at what point does it become too much? And does influence become deceit, or not necessarily deceit, but shallow?
Yeah,
I think shallow is a better word.
It's so true.
But brands like Avon and Mary Kay and some of the other women's based brands that had been successful in the 40s and 50s started to introduce the idea of women as moneymakers. There was still debate over whether or not they should be, but those were the first, I would like to call them freedom brands for women's business.
Absolutely. And it's interesting now that we as a culture, and I think that there's a huge shift in us reverting back to the time before the convenience culture and this mass production era exists. How many millennials make it their entire personality, including me, that we can make sourdough bread? And it's,
I love this topic. This is so true.
This is exactly what, you get to a certain point where we're now realizing that all of that mass production is not good. That's not what we want. We can make homemade items. And I mean, look at you. You had a Publix behind your backyard in terms of how much you grew. You had the amount, so much. You were homesteading. And that's a wonderful route that we're going back to. But it's like the anti-mass production, the anti-industrial revolution, because we can do all of that. And we actually realize that we can probably do it a little bit better than just what's coming off the line.
Well, even if we can't, it still makes us feel better that we have some control. I think one of the problems that we have right now, and this is almost entirely because of social media, is everybody's posting their best life. Everybody's posting their best garden product. Everybody's posting their best decorating ideas. And some of us are not good at certain things. I know I'm not good at decorating a room. So I can watch an influencer and pick out little things that I think I can apply. But the overall big picture still requires that you are good at that task. That's what influencers are good at. I have friends who are great at it, and I would go get advice from them.
Yeah.
But my microcosm is important to, and I'm using the term my generally, it's important to my own psychology, but influencing expands my capacity a little bit. And I think that's where that tug is. I want to reach out and look at what an influencer does. But at the same time, I have to accept the fact that I am never going to be that influencer. That is the success, I think, of marketing through influencers and brand managers is,
I agree.
For those of us that want to just get enough, we want to see what the possibilities are.
Yeah, and I think back to the conversation of what does the psychology look like to influence that person, whether it's for creating homemade things, it's for that, taking care of what you want, or is it the other way of how did these brands, kind of touching back in that history piece, how did these brands really convince people that it was better? I think maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about where that fear came from.
Fear was a big deal.
And
it still is.
Where did you see that during maybe those periods of time? Like, how did the war influence those things?
It's really, really hard to narrow down one thing. Humans act out of two big things: fear and desire for something. And there are plenty of books written about this. There are plenty of romances written about it. If you look at any genre that moves you to read, there are one of those two things. If you go back to the turn of the century, you have Spanish flu, which scared the hell out of everybody. You have World War I, World War II. That's just in 4 decades. 5 if you go all the way to the end of the Second World War. And imagine all those children hiding under desks because of fear of bombs. So selling the idea that you need to hide under a desk is an easy sell because nobody wants to think about being hit by a bomb.
Yeah.
So all of these things that you convince people to do, doesn't matter what it is, if you start with a fear, it convinces them a whole lot faster. But at the same time, if you convince, as we were mentioning a few minutes ago, a young woman that using this cold cream is going to keep her young forever, and that's the marketing message, you have no value unless you stay young forever, she's going to buy up all that cold cream.
Right.
So all they had to do was pick one thing or another. If we were talking about eating a particular thing, or the vitamin culture right now is crazy.
Yeah.
And I see influencers talk a lot about, oh, this supplement did this for me. This supplement did this for me, as though the human body isn't a fingerprint.
Right.
That's a huge problem, because you have to be very, very careful how you position those things. So the best brands are the ones that carefully position what they are recommending. That wasn't true in the Industrial Revolution.
It was a one-size-fits-all.
A lot of things were one size fit all. And I suppose that's probably, there's a true to it an extent now too. But careful consideration of what was being sold is the quality versus quantity argument. And what were they better at? I don't really know the answer to that question, but we can see that visual representation and celebrity representation, because celebrity advertising started way back with television and radio. So what is it that motivated them that still motivates us today?
Yeah.
People showing that this improved their lives, so it must surely improve your life as well.
It's a cause and effect. It's it's reaching towards the imagination of what your life could possibly be like. That is truly it is the best life, and it's also I think the root of all of marketing itself. It is you perceiving what your life or your market or your business could be better once you've achieved that goal.
Sure.
And I think it's interesting to talk about, you bring up the celebrity influence in different styles of advertising and marketing. All of these tactics, which I'd like to kind of jump into, there's so many different styles that really influence how you advertise. It's just, they're tools. It's not necessarily manipulation, but it's mastery of human behavior. And that is really important to think about too. It's not necessarily that the brand is trying to manipulate you, but it's also how they know it's going to work. They know it. At the end of the day, each brand has their mission statement and their vision, and it's certainly not to deceive you, but it's also to convince you that they really do believe that their product is going to be the best for you. So one of the things that you bring up is the social proof, the herd behavior, the herd mentality, the celebrity piece, bringing in that social proof to say, well, this celebrity did it and they love it. I mean, how many advertisements have you seen on literally any brand, even going back into the beginning of television, the beginning of newspapers? Hey, it worked for, the president, so it's going to work for you.
Think about doctors promoting cigarettes.
Right.
Imagine. And no doctor now would do that.
Right.
But that is a classic example of, they believed at the time that it was, or some people, and I imagine it wasn't universal, but some people believed at the time that smoking was good for you.
Yep.
And that's how they advertised it. We know better now. But like you said, it wasn't a deliberate attempt to deceive. They believed it. So how does that fit into how humans evaluate product, especially now with influencing culture being so universal,
so prevalent? And unfortunately, there's a lot of different locations where they may not be like FDA approved, but they're still being sold. And so it really takes that consumer knowledge, which is now more than ever. During the time of the Industrial Revolution, consumers were not educated, but now we live in an educated market. So when you're talking about how brands received products back in the day, when there was a traveling salesman who was selling vacuums and was knocking on your door, telling you this is the best thing since literally sliced bread, versus now.
This was recently invented.
Yeah. But now you have the ability to Google what you want. You have reviews. This is a consumer educated market. And I think that brands need to understand it's a completely different arena that they're moving into. And so you have to beat out what Google's AI is going to tell you when they Google what your brand is.
Absolutely.
And so if that's not dialed in and you're not able to provide that immediate value for that consumer up front, you're probably not going to win them, because they could potentially find your competitor who maybe has a better explanation for what they do than you.
And how are you going to sell a person over a price difference? So am I going to choose a product as a consumer that has $1 difference in price because I believe in the quality of that product, or I've seen someone else use that product, or I've used it myself in the past and historically it's behaved very, very well for me and I don't care that the price has gone up?
Absolutely.
So what, and I'm partially asking this question because I really don't know the answer. What of those things is the most effective in marketing a product that has a good generic competition or another good brand? Is it Hewlett Packard over Asus? I mean, those are some of the brands that I know from my computing past.
Yeah.
How best is that accomplished these days?
And that is such a hard question, because there's so many different categories and industries that different advertising techniques work better for. But what I go back to is one of the tactics called cognitive fluency. And I think that it goes down to the concept of keep it simple, stupid. And the easier that you can communicate the value of your brand, regardless of what the competitors out there, if you can make it easier than your competitor for a customer to want to have your product in their back pocket, then the better it is, for the better chances you have of actually selling that product. So, that's kind of a blanket statement to the question, but I personally think that cognitive fluency, let me just take a step back too, is saying, I'm going to make this very easy for you to recognize and very simple for you to resonate with. So you think of like Nike's Just Do It. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, and it also resonates to your emotion. And you don't have to over-explain what Nike does. You don't have to over-explain that Peloton isn't just a biking company or a workout company. It sells self-discipline and commitment to craft. So being able to resonate easily with a brand, understand it even off of maybe just the colors, off of the logo, off of their 3-word motto. And I'm not saying this is a one-size-fits-all, but I think that when people can really, really resonate to a simple message that resonates to exactly your target audience, and you don't overcomplicate it, you're going to be able to get that sale. You'll be able to kind of win that audience.
Humans are simple creatures when it comes to things like that. Even exercise programs. If I wanted to start an exercise program that is specific to my demographic, and I get a lot of these kinds of videos, reels, social media is constantly reminding me that I need to exercise. And it's
so true.
Very, very specific to my demographic.
Yeah.
It doesn't show me CrossFit because I don't want to go to the hospital every single day. It shows me things that are specific to women my age in my circumstance, which I find really interesting because it thinks, whoever is advertising these things, think that those things are more easily accessible to me. Mm-hmm. They're not any more easily accessible to me than going to the gym and getting a trainer. But some of those things have filtered through to me because, I can do this at home while I'm watching television. Right. That's accessible to me as a person. So I'm watching what you're saying about the simplification of things. Do you remember in the movie Something About Mary, 6-second abs?
Yes.
Okay.
That's it.
This is exactly what I'm thinking of. No, it's not 7-second abs or 7-minute abs. Sorry. It's 6-minute abs. Mm-hmm. That is the absolute truth.
Absolutely. And it all comes down to those different techniques. I mean, it's saying that there's a loss aversion, right? Like you only have 10 seconds to get this product before it goes back up to full price.
Oh, yeah.
Or what about when you're shopping online and there's a countdown, there's a timer, that you have to make this purchase within 9 minutes.
The tariff thing that's going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before the tariffs wipe out our company.
Right. And all of those are just techniques to get us to do something. And keeping it that simplistic style, straightforward approach, I think is truly one of the easiest ways to get your message across. I frequently run into agencies and companies who tend to overcomplicate what they're trying to do because, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it just makes them sound important. You're saying, I have all the capabilities to do all of these things, but it's when you're a jack of all trades and a master of none, then you're not making it easier for your customer to understand what you're trying to do.
And what is relevant in this moment? Have you captured, have you got your finger on the pulse of what is relevant in this moment? That is an age-old technique for getting anyone to believe anything. And I'm not just talking about buying things. I'm talking about political messages or faith messages or whatever. Relevancy is a key understanding of making people move to the next step. One of the reasons why mass production was so effective is because it democratized having things. You democratized the automobile when you could mass produce them and bring the cost down from a Rolls Royce to a Ford. Everything that has ever been mass produced democratizes a product. Now, unfortunately, it also devalues a product if you go far enough with it. And that's the whole supply and demand argument. And I'm not an economist, so I don't want to get into that. But what is easy to understand is if you can make everyone believe that they have to have this thing. We have to have this new soap, Ivory soap, or we have to have Pond's cold cream. Or remember the Breck commercial we looked at yesterday?
Yeah, exactly.
Tell a friend, and that friend is going to believe that because you have beautiful hair, she too can have beautiful hair if you use Breck or Fabergé or whatever it was. And the idea that I'm sitting at lunch with my friend. Now, this is through a phone because we're talking about influencers, but I'm sitting at lunch with my friend, and my friend said that she had great success in using this particular product. I, too, am going to feel that way. And that is what influencers are doing because I want to look like that exercise guru who probably eats one chicken breast a day and exercises far more than she admits.
Yes.
I don't know that that's true, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah, it does. And I think that breeds also this it's a really, really kind of negative trend that we may be falling prey to in this current market, especially with the emergence of TikTok Shop, is overconsumption and consumerism.
Absolutely.
And I mean, how many videos I've watched of these travel influencers who pack their bags and they have a little plastic compartment for every single product that they have. And it's just this overconsumption of material. And, I think that does touch back into that mass production because you want to have whatever that person's having. You want to have that lifestyle, but to achieve that and to have that, you have to have the products that can cost $1 or $2. It's the same concept of Shein, and it's the same concept of Temu and all of these like at your fingertips convenience items and overconsumption. It is a huge cycle.
And it's, what do they call that? Fast fashion, where you're going to wear it for a season and then you're going to trash it. And then you see, I've noticed influencers lately, and this is going back to what we were talking about, the reversal of this process.
Yes.
Where women who know how to sew and know how to create their own fashion go into thrift stores and are pulling things that can be modified to modern standards. Not everybody can do that. Holy cow, that's a talent I aspire to have. But that person is showing a new avenue for consumption. And it's reconsumption, which is that's a big psychological thing right now. And it's rolling back the consumerism of the Industrial Revolution, which I think is a really interesting phenomenon that's happening right now.
It is. And I also just want to make it clear too, just for listeners in general, is that there is no shame and no issue with that being where you need to purchase your items.
No, not at all.
If that fits your lifestyle and your budget, that's the reality of it. And there's no shame in that at all. But I think it's just interesting that all of these topics, and this is literally why we have the podcast, why this entire concept was created, is because we could talk about it, that there is long-term effects from seeing how things were made out of necessity, matches, bread, literally everything that was created during the height of the Industrial Revolution into today, and what the modern consumer behaves like.
Sure. Look at cereals. Cereals were created by a couple of the Kellogg brothers who made everybody believe, because cereal is a big industry now, that having breakfast cereal in the morning with a banana is the best breakfast possible. Well, what they did to market that combination was, in every box of cereal, they put a coupon for a bunch of bananas. Well, now you have created this package deal, which, going back to your comment before about simplicity, you've made it turnkey, basically, for everyone to have the perfect breakfast in the morning based on what you believed. There was no science behind it. It was
not at all.
It was a genius marketing ploy.
Joint venture. That's, hey, Chiquita Banana, you're going to get sold all of the times we're selling the cereal box, you're probably going to get, a lead or a prospect out of it.
No, they're going to go buy a bunch of bananas because we're telling them that is the best possible breakfast. And now, of course, there's a whole bunch of science that says that that's not necessarily true. And we could debate about this all day.
Yeah.
But just the idea that one company is saying, hey, a good complement to this is this, and we're going to make it simple for you to get both items. Yeah. That's the Industrial Revolution in a nutshell.
That's why peanut butter and jelly are sold in the same aisle.
Exactly. Now I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
I know.
See how that works?
But it's so interesting. And I mean, I am not a psychologist, but I understand that when there is supply for product, or when there's demand for a product, how do we supply them? And I also understand a lot about modern need and how to communicate that product and concept to the public. And I think a lot of it has to do with understanding how the psychology works. You don't have to be a psychologist to understand it, but you got to know who your market is, how to communicate with them, and then how to effectively sell to them and find them on their buyer's journey as well, which I think is a really important piece too. You see the Industrial Revolution where it's a lot of outcome, right? Like they want to create the lotions and, the beauty products because it's going to look a certain way. And
the home products to give you the perfect home.
Right. And we know that customer wants to buy it to look a certain way. It's the same exact concept that happens in any single industry, whether it's business to business or business to consumer. You're fulfilling that need. And it's just a really, really interesting concept that psychology is incredibly embedded into the way that we buy.
Yes, you tap into the fear first, the fear of aging, and then you tap into the desire to continue to look youthful and healthy, and you combine those two things, and you have reached the human who wants to allay both the fear and satisfy the desire. So the best marketers, and you have to take into account social standing in that too. The Wedgwood story and how successful he was in putting Wedgwood in every household had to do with status. Right. So you create this fear of not keeping up with the Joneses, and an easy way to satisfy the desire to, for the social standing. And if you go back and you study any product, right now, study beauty products, what's the fear? Fear of aging. We have a horrible fear of aging. For whatever reasons, it doesn't necessarily have to be a vanity fear. It could also be fear of aging because you love living and you want to stay vital and you want to stay healthy. Whatever it is, the influence is working.
It is. And I see that, it does come down to aging, I think. And I think that's especially with this kind of new accepted beauty standard that exists today, which I do think is a product of Instagram and the emergence of the Kardashians and this whole concept around what it takes to be beautiful in modern day. And you see a lot of these influencers on TikTok who do a get ready with me. And then they pan to their products and they're literally using 15 different products on their face at one time. And that's because they're probably getting money off of the brand deals, obviously, but then B, to avoid aging. And so it all kind of comes back down to that moment where that psychology to convince people that they're not good enough or they're fulfilling that like deep set need, kind of like that Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. Where does your brand fit into that? And you're speaking straight into that target audience because you're fulfilling it. And if you're making it easy for that customer to understand that you're fulfilling that need, it is a legitimate need. They need that product.
Yeah, you can't get complicated about products. Like you can say fights wrinkles, but you can't say fights wrinkles and resurfaces your skin and blah, blah, blah. You're trying to get whatever that person's fear is. Yeah. Does that person have wrinkles? Nope. What does that person have? Does that person have rosacea? Does that person have absolutely beautiful skin and wants to perpetuate their beautiful skin? There are all kinds of reasons. And it's so human to fear what we don't know is coming. And, and by the way, let's make clear, we're not the first generation, era, whatever, to want to perpetuate beauty. The ancient people did it too.
Oh, absolutely.
And there is plenty of evidence. There's plenty of material that they've found of, and some of the material is really interesting.
A little bit of lead poisoning with your makeup.
Crocodile dung.
Lovely.
All kinds of things that they put in these products that would perpetuate whatever the fears were or however they were communicated back then.
Absolutely.
And it's not just that. It's products having to do with like reproduction. Most people many people maybe don't know this, but there was contraception in ancient Rome. And there was, the selling of that product too. What is it that you need to stop or start? And who am I going to go to as the source? Which is another question that I find interesting about what is happening now is who is your authority? Your personal authority. Who is my personal authority? Exactly.
And just like I think you mentioned in potentially one of our earlier podcasts was you go to a specific source for a specific need for a history topic, and you know where to go because they're the authority figure on that. So kind of going back, to wrap up what we're chatting about today with the Industrial Revolution and kind of that psychology piece, the mass consumerism and production lines. What do you think the biggest takeaways are from that era, and where do you see the biggest impact today?
The most, absolutely, bar none, the most successful outcomes for the Industrial Revolution, Edison, for example, weren't necessarily the people that came up with the idea. Edison didn't invent the light bulb, but he was really good at marketing it. So positioning the people who were most successful were the people who were able to tap into what was needed and what was popular at the time. And it was pervasive. It wasn't in any one area. It wasn't just cosmetics or homewares. It was textiles, clothing, shoes. The best marketers knew what their audience was looking for. And more importantly, they were able to change when their audience changed. So generational branding, and how many of those do we have, really? What brands are 500 years old?
Yeah. It's very hard to say, I mean, literally just the personas that have lasted through time, but not products themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And
the invention of the wheel, but it's not a brand.
Exactly. In fact, that's something that it's got to stay around.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you bring up people too, because Marcus Aurelius is a great example of a persona that has reemerged as a brand. In fact, I heard a philosopher talking about Broics the other day. Marcus Aurelius is a popular Stoic. A lot of what he wrote,
Broics.
So this is a term I recently heard a YouTuber, a philosophy YouTuber, use when talking about other YouTubers. I'm not going to name any names, but there are people who have been using philosophy, Stoic philosophy, to promote an ideal, a modern ideal. There is some value in that because a lot of what Marcus Aurelius wrote about is relevant to how humans should allay their own fears, deal with their anxieties, things like that. But the term Broic
that's hilarious.
has given a whole new face to this idea that you can't take a very, very old idea and instantly package it for the modern era. Marcus Aurelius was dealing with things that most business owners, humans nowadays, whatever, will never see. And ideals that we do not have these days. So you can't pick up certain people and put them into the modern era and expect that those lessons are going to apply universally. But it's a great way to try and influence people.
And I mean, like I think we said it in, a previous podcast, but where we come from in this podcast is also not from a place of saying, just because this happened before means it's going to happen again, or that this is a direct cause and effect, or that it's
We can't
a direct.
say that.
We can't.
There's no way to say
it's just a mirroring. It's taking the baseline concept and understanding how it's still relevant today, and
because the human mind hasn't changed. I believe the statistic is 50,000 years. So you may not be dealing with ideas the same way. And we can see that through linguistics. And if you follow along through how ideas developed over time, which is a whole separate area of historical study, then you can see how we can't use presentism very cleanly. You can't take a Roman concept and put it into modern history. People have tried. Certain people who we will not name have tried. But you can still see that human response to certain things is the same. How we apply that thing is what we have to constantly be better at as influencers if we want to sell a product or a brand.
And understanding that just because it worked then doesn't mean it's going to work now, but also, are there lessons? What can we learn from that experience? Like they always say, if you don't look back, how are you supposed to kind of be successful in the present? And it's so incredibly true.
Even if you're just looking back 10 years, looking back is important because you can see how certain things work and how certain things didn't. You can sometimes see long-term effects. No one's going to look back at, as much as I hate to bring these things up, Nagasaki and Hiroshima and think that that was a positive idea. You understand it for the time, and I don't mean understand it like accept it. I mean, you can study it for its time, but everyone that studies that has to look back and say, that was a horrible thing. You can look at the match girls, for example. Those people didn't know that those girls were going to die from phosphorus poisoning. But once they did they do the right thing? That's the reason that you study history.
100%. That's, I mean, coming from the historian, it's so true because it's what truly makes you so excited about, your profession in general.
Absolutely.
But then for me, as just a history buff who has no formal training in any of this, it's still wonderful to see how it influences my profession and everything that I do on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
So I think it's really, really interesting. And What we give credit to in terms of the Industrial Revolution, specifically, since that was our main topic today, is just the psychology behind it, how much it has changed, and what still the effects that we're seeing today, and what we can do as people to not only recognize that this advertising kind of mastery is happening in front of us, it's reaching out to you as into your deep set emotions, and how do you react to it? And if you're a business, how do you tap into it better to increase profits in a way that is not deceptive?
Right. And to be clear, this is a very narrow portion of what we study about the Industrial Revolution. There's no way in this podcast we could talk about the environmental fallout and the human resource fallout and all of the
And like we mentioned before, the exploitation alone.
exploitation. And on the positive side, the conveniences, obviously, sliced bread is useful if you're trying to feed a household full of people. But it needs to be understood also, I don't want to forget to say this, studying history isn't remembering dates. We try to remember dates frequently, but studying history has to do with understanding how humans experience things. And you can't study history in the current, like we will be studying, for example, the effect of COVID for the next 100 years because
It's present.
Right. And humans cannot understand history as it is occurring. We have to be able to look back and remove the noise. And that's really what studying
Our
history
modern day
is.
perception.
Our modern day perception and our modern fears. And, you know, when people study us in 100 years, they will have an enormous volume of information that has to be analyzed. What is worse, do you think? We have all of this documentation of the Industrial Revolution, some of it visual, video, photos, whatever. We don't have that for the Roman era. We don't have that for the Tudor era, which is another topic that we're going to talk about. We have what was written at the time. Yep. We are very limited in our sources. People studying us in 100 years are going to have too much information to filter through.
Right.
What do we think that's going to look like for the person trying to build a market for a particular product?
So interesting. Well, I just wanted to thank you again for being my wonderful co-host and talking today about the Industrial Revolution. And also thank you so much to our View Media for filming and producing our podcast. So thank you so much for listening. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and just hit subscribe. I'd love for you to follow along as we talk about different concepts throughout history. We're going to touch on everything that we possibly can. So I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you soon.